lifesavers. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. My apologies for the technology glitch. I'm not sure what the heck happened there, but I do appreciate the patience and hanging in there with us all as we work through this thing. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen. And it should look like that.
Looks good, John.
Okay. All right. This is about where we left off. Did anybody have any glaring questions from last week's stuff that we reviewed very, very quickly with? None? Okay. I ask that if possible, that you have your cameras on just so we know that you're here and not having walked away because of the continuing ed units that are associated with this, it's just good to be able to see your faces, if possible. Okay, I'm going to forward it on. Tammy, are you following all those emails? Okay, thank you. All right, so evaluation reports. So last week we talked about, just to warm everybody back up a little bit, we talked about evaluation plans and everything on an evaluation plan that is checked off. A school district is obligated to provide some form of assessment in that specific area. So when we are monitoring, we are looking for the bridge between that evaluation plan and the evaluation report. So everything that's checked off on the evaluation plan needs to be summarized or noted within the evaluation report, and that's where we are today. So for evaluation reports, obviously, if the parent is not able to come there or attend the initial meeting, we need to have that the meeting cannot occur for the initial meeting. But if you do have follow-up reevaluation meetings that come after the student's been initially identified as needing IDA eligibility, then we postpone, or then you can have the parent attend remotely if at all possible. You want to be sure to capture the parent comments in the evaluation report, giving them some opportunity for input, as well as maybe to help steer some of the conversation. So it's advisable, kind of a best practice, maybe to give the parents a heads up that they may be asked some questions. So if you can give them front load things a little bit with them to let them know if they're going to have opportunity for comments, they can maybe come to that meeting prepared to give those. Classroom-based assessments, we need to have those. Those are automatically checked off for every evaluation plan. So those need to carry over into the evaluation report as well as including observations as well. A little bit of reverb. Be sure you're muted, please. And then we have the assessment areas, as I mentioned just a bit ago. It needs to align with the evaluation plan. And then there we are looking for not so much the content, but more along the lines of making sure that what was checked off in the evaluation plan carries over into the evaluation report. One of the important things about the evaluation report is the area of implications. And implications need to be worded in a way that do not suggest predetermination. So an implication would be Johnny might work best in a small group setting, as opposed to saying Johnny is eligible for special education services or Johnny would benefit from receiving special education services for the following reasons. In the implications we're providing, it's a good suggestion, and in most of our school districts, the people who write the implications are typically our school psychologists. So they provide that information and as well as consistent language throughout the evaluation report document. You're providing some things like suggested teaching methods, primarily for those regular ed teachers, because if the student is determined not eligible, those strategies might be helpful for them in implementing to be implemented in the regular ed classroom. I recognize Custer County High School. Thank you, Val. And you want to include things, word language like may benefit, as opposed to will benefit, but you want to keep things vague to, again, stay away from that language that talks about that could suggest predetermination of the student being eligible. And in addition to all of these, you also have, they need to be formulated based upon the assessment results. So you don't want to have anything that's too lofty in there. It's all based upon the performance of the student on those assessments. And again, then making it individualized, of course, for the student on what would be appropriate for them. Sometimes we see cut and paste in our monitoring process. We will see cut and paste. So it might say Johnny would benefit from when it should be Susie would benefit from. And so you want to make sure that we don't just use cut and paste language within there, although they might be very, very similar. And then I provide the breadcrumb trail for the evaluation report, how to find it, how to get to the editors, and that kind of thing within the evaluation report document itself. And there's 3 parts to that. We're going to have to fly through. We've got an awful lot of additional information or territory to cover tonight. So we're now at the IEP portion of this presentation, and this will take us probably the majority of the time that we are together tonight. And because we were delayed in getting started, obviously, that doesn't help any. So we'll have to try to, if questions can be postponed, write them down, and then we can get to those through the chat, or we can have a conversation upon the conclusion of tonight's meeting. So here's the breadcrumb trail for developing the IEP or getting that process started. You can see the path and the index and where you would go for building a new document for a student. And again, this process or these nuts and bolts are intended for people who really don't have any idea what they're doing and just getting started with developing IEPs, or the special ed, becoming acquainted with the special education process. In Infinite Campus, as Christy had mentioned last week, you build households and you have the students' demographics, you have the parent and guardian information, and you're also adding in there the date of the meeting that the meeting occurred. It's not the date that the IEP was written. It is, in the event that you write a draft, it is the date of the meeting that needs to be plugged in there. A big one that comes up are the required components of the front page of the IEP. Where we're talking about student comments, parent comments, and their concerns. And any of those concerns that the parent might bring up need to be addressed within the IEP. And again, this is where maybe some front loading for parents would be helpful when you're talking about scheduling the meeting, and letting them know, especially those that are new to the process, letting them know that they will be asked a series of questions. Do they have any comments about their child's performance? Do they have any concerns about where their child is at the moment? And sometimes giving them that information ahead of time, well in advance, is very helpful for them to know that they are to be, the hope is to have them to be active participants in that meeting as opposed to just idle standing by and signing off as discussed. Any considerations of special factors are talked about as well, and anything that you check off as being a yes has to be addressed within the IEP. So does the behavior impede the learning of the student or that of others? Then there should be some behavioral things talked about somewhere in the IEP. That doesn't have to be goals, but certainly with regards to supplementary aids and services and so or something similar, to be talking about why is that a concern for the team and providing some direction for where that's going to be going in the future. So if you check any of the considerations of special factors as being yes, then it must be addressed within that IEP document. So again, here's my example in Infinite Campus. I won't spend much time on that. I'm assuming that most everybody by now has kind of navigated their way through there. But these are the various areas we've already talked about, and you would be clicking save and move on to the next section in the editors. So in the consideration of special factors, these should be completed during the team meeting. They should not be done ahead of time. So if you provide a draft document for your parents, advisable to leave that blank because that then could suggest some predetermination and as well as the parent just feeling like their input for that meeting does not is not important. The four areas that are addressed within those considerations of special factors are whether the student's behavior impedes the learning of themselves or others. Do they have communication needs? Speech is not necessarily a communication need. If it is so just because the student might have speech doesn't mean you would check yes for communication needs. We have guidance in our guidance document that elaborates that a little bit in greater detail. Assistive technology devices and services. Again, there, if it's checked yes, it needs to be within the IEP. And if the student might be limited English proficient. If any of those are checked, enough said. And then back to the Infinite Campus route and for how to get through these things. We get into the area of the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, or what is commonly known to in our world is a PLAF statement. And that is something that varies across the state, but there is a whole lot of question marks as far as how should they be written. And first and foremost, they need to be written individually. On an individualized basis. They also need to consist of these following areas, these four bullets here, providing academic performance, which includes quantitative and qualitative data, including functional performance, what they can and cannot do, how the disability affects involvement in general education, and then lastly, how do they compare to their peers. A PLAF statement should be specific in terms of if the goals are going to be talking about reading or math, then the PLAF statement needs to be about that. You can't just combine everything into one PLAF statement and then have that and then copy paste that from one to the next for multiple goals. So or multiple areas. So be sure that when you write your PLAF statements, it's specific to that particular area of interest or of emphasis within the IEP. And then here is the bread trail for to get to the editors within the Infinite Campus process. Then we come up with measurable annual goals, or commonly referred to as MAGs. And here are some of the requirements that are necessary for the student or for our MAG statements. It needs to be aligned with the PLAF. So if it's talked about in the PLAF, or if it's important enough to have a goal for, it's important enough to include in the PLAF. One of the things I have been saying for some guidance for districts during our pre-monitoring trainings has been to look at it backwards. Think of your goals first. You as a teacher, or you're building, you have a kind of a Rolodex of ideas in your head with where the goals are going to be going towards. Think of the goals first and then come back to building your PLAF statement rather than the other way around. Because sometimes what happens is, at least I've had experiences where a person is you're feverishly writing a goal, and somebody says, "Oh, we need to have something in there for handling or for I'm sorry, written expression," and then suddenly you plug in a goal there, but the PLAF does not deal any or speak or address at all the concerns with written expression. So it's a good idea that has been very effective, I think, for districts to think of it backwards rather than the other way around. You have to indicate the expected level of performance. So they're going to achieve 4 out of 5, whatever. They're going to have 0 referrals, discipline referrals to the office. That's what you're shooting for. And then how is that going to be measured, and who will be measuring that, making those measurements of the student's progress? So as observed through teacher observations, as observed through the lack of discipline referrals, that kind of a thing. Then we get into the area of short-term objectives. And short-term objectives are intended to break large, complex tasks into small, more manageable ones. So you might have a goal of, and I'm going to use the example of building a peanut butter and jelly sandwich as the goal. Well, there are a number of steps involved with that goal. And those could be broken down into short sequential steps that could ultimately lead to the achievement of making a PB&J. So short-term objectives are required for anybody who takes the alternative assessment. But short-term objectives certainly have their place for regular for students that are eligible to take the regular statewide assessment as well. They do have their place. It is not necessarily a requirement, but they can be utilized for all areas in the goal writing process, regardless of abilities. So here's an example. David will achieve a reading score of 5th grade level or above as measured by the QRI. And through that process, they create a series of short-term objectives. By October, when given 20 unfamiliar words that contain short vowel sounds, David will decode them with 90%. And then it progresses. By October, when given 20 unfamiliar words that contain long vowel sounds, he will decode them with 90% accuracy. And it just keeps moving along into December and so on. So you can see a natural progression. One builds upon the other until finally you reach the goal of getting to that, achieving that 5th grade level for reading score. I hope that makes sense to everybody. What is the purpose of short-term objectives? And again, this is particularly for our significantly disabled students, the lowest of our population, and trying to help them with breaking things down into more sequential steps. So let's say, for instance, you are working on some counting activities with a student, and you want to have some of that guided practice where they are moving an object as they're counting. So 1, 2, 3, and so on. There are some multiple tasks associated with that to achieve that roll counting goal. So we break those up into these short-term objectives. Students with significant cognitive abilities require more frequent benchmarking than our normal or closer to normal students. Students participate in a modified curriculum typically, maybe not always, but typically. And for students that make more incremental progress, short-term objectives and goals can make progress more transparent for the parents. So when the parent sees the progress report, it's not just have not met goal all the time. You can actually hopefully see maybe some progression through some of those short-term objectives as well. And then it's obviously easier to make some adjustments along the way. Maybe you missed a step or there was just some oversight there, overlooked a particular step that would be helpful for achieving that goal. And then it also then provides some data with regards to the regression and recruitment piece that is utilized in determining extended school year for students. I'll just skip this. And we get into special education and related services. Each goal needs to have service minutes reflected within that. So you have a goal for reading, a goal for math, then there would be service minutes associated with how that and when that will be delivered for that student, in what setting. So you're giving those would be your service minutes that you would be calculating. Sometimes that could just be the actual period of the day. Sometimes that could be for just 30 minutes a day, sort of a thing, after instruction occurs. If a student requires transportation to receive transportation in order to achieve their academic success, then in the service minutes, what you would want to put down is at least 1 minute there, because it's impossible to know how long the student might be needing to ride the bus. If you've ever ridden a school bus, it's difficult to be pretty consistent with your time. So the idea here is just to have an occupied space of 1 minute there, to thereby triggering that section for transportation.
Hi, John. Could I interrupt for a second?
Sure, Tim.
So Tim Berg, Polson School District, Special Ed Director for 14 years. Go back to that last slide. That's pretty misleading. Each goal area needs to have an estimate of service minutes reflected in it, not each goal. You might have multiple goals under a goal area.
You're right.
You might have 3 goals. Yeah, just to clarify for anybody there.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. The short-term objectives, just to clarify, you normally don't need those unless you want to, unless the student has a significant cognitive delay. Otherwise, you can write a goal without short-term objectives.
That is true. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it, Tim. Thanks for checking on me.
No problem. Not trying to step on toes, but
not at all.
It's a lot to cover.
Yep, it is. We get into this topic of least restrictive environment, and what we are looking for there is how do you provide, is the student's education occurring in as normal as possible a setting for that as compared to their peers? So if you check no, you got to explain why they are not, why that is abbreviated or different from their peers. If the student's day is longer or shorter than their peers without the disability, you have to be able to explain why that is. And there's a narrative box within the editors there to be able to, that you would indicate why the student's day is longer or shorter. I've never heard of anybody having a longer day than their peers, but it's possible, I suppose. But the overall, you want to have, within that, you want to have, ultimately, the goal is to have to extend the students' hours so they're closer to their peers. And so you want to be able to have some type of a plan for when that's going to be, how is that going to be evaluated, determined, and slowly, hopefully increased over time. You don't want it just to be a shortened school day for the entire school year. That needs to be evaluated periodically throughout the year to extend that if at all possible. We get into the wonderful world of statewide assessments. And first and foremost, we got to talk about the fact that all students with disabilities need to be provided the opportunity to take the state test. They don't have to ace it. They don't have to do a fantastic job at it, but they have to have the opportunity. And so we as a state have really placed a great deal of emphasis over the last couple of years to get to really focus on the statewide assessments and get some good data there. And but there is no opt-out from taking the statewide assessments. The student has to at least try or be given the opportunity to try to take that test. In Montana, the law says basically the same thing. Every child has the right to an education, and must be afforded them the same opportunities as their peers. So again, that speaks to that opting out option. It's not there. There may have been a time in the past where that might have been in play, but the opt out is not an option for students with regards to the statewide assessments. And that's for grades 3 through 8. And 11, just as a refresher. So if a student is in second grade and the IEP might be carrying over into third grade, particularly that first statewide assessment window for third grade, then that second grade IEP needs to address that. So your options for the statewide assessment are with accommodations, without accommodations, and or the alternative assessment. That's really what you have to choose from. District-wide assessments are a bit different, but the statewide assessments, these are our choices. I'm going to go a little bit into some detail on each of the assessments for both the regular statewide assessment and then the DMR assessment as well. So in Montana, it stands for Montana Aligned to Standards Throughout the Year, or MAST. And here's some information on what is going to be assessed during those or for the MAST assessment. And then I provided the current dates for the testing windows for your information. And these windows, the students have a series of testlets to take, and they are supposed to be quite abbreviated quite a bit as compared to what the old the CRT assessment the original one used to look like, where it was hours to plow through. These are to be short little bursts of assessment opportunities for the kids. And then for grades 5 and 8, there is the MSA, which is the Montana Science Assessment, and you can see that there's only one single testing window for the science assessment. We get into the 11th grade, and that's the ACT, that they address ELA, math, and science. And the testing windows there are different than the others for the MAST assessment. Then we get to the DLM alternative assessment, and that is for students who have our significant disabilities and cognitive disabilities in place of the MAST assessments for them for grades 3 through 8 and the 11th grade. And what that consists of is a series of testlets that, similar to their peers, they take 5 to 15 minutes in length to go through. And we have the testing windows, as you see there, for 2 testing windows in the course of the year. I've included a link here for the DLM crosswalk, which talks about accommodations for the assessment. So some of the language might be slightly different in the DLM vocabulary, but the crosswalk is intended to act as a, so if you had, let's say, cover overlays might be appropriate for the student in normal language, maybe the DLM calls that something else. That's why I've got the crosswalk there for reference for you. Okay. And then there's for the DLM, there's the alternative science, which is for grades 5, 8, and the ACT students in grades 11. And again, it's a similar thing, 15-minute testlets, and the testing windows are the same as well. One thing that we have done during my time here at OPI is we've managed to take the state down to be below the 1% threshold across the state. School districts can exceed the 1% cap for students taking the alternative assessment. Who cannot exceed the 1% is the state. And so I've taken a few emails, phone calls from school districts saying that we have been, that their school district has been identified, or they've identified over 1% of their population. Is that okay? The answer is yes. But in that process, or in our efforts of the last few years, we've managed to get below the 1% at the state level. And so that's almost a happy dance time. We don't get many opportunities to do that, but it's something to celebrate for sure. But we're looking at these things, the criteria for the alternative assessment. The student has to have a significant cognitive disability. Typically, that would be the labels of cognitive delay, severe autism, and or traumatic brain injury. Not in every case, but typically those are the handicapping conditions under IDEA that might be eligible for that. Does a student have an active IEP and receive services under IDEA? Well, yeah, we're all together building the IEPs at that moment, and so obviously they do have one. And then the student demonstrates cognitive abilities and adaptive behavior required for adjustments to the general curriculum or severe modifications. So replacement curriculum, life skills kinds of curriculum, and so on. So if the student, they have to be demonstrating that yes for that particular question. And then student requiring direct and extensive instruction to acquire, maintain, generalize, and transfer new skills. Again, that is the would be for the lowest population, or the lowest members of our population we serve. So if you answer yes for all four of those areas, the student, by team's decision, would therefore be eligible to take the alternative assessment. What we can't do is have a student take the alternative assessment because we're afraid of behavioral blowouts, or that they're functioning 2 years below their peers is not a justification for taking the alternative assessment. So there is a list of potential what does not make a student eligible for the alternative assessment, and that's located within the alt assessment guidance document, which is located on the wonderful OPI website. I say that tongue in cheek, sorry. Here are some of the non-examples I was mentioning a bit ago. The disability or category does not make a student automatically eligible for the alternative assessment. So maybe they are cognitive delay, but they might be high functioning cognitive delay, and therefore would be certainly could be eligible for the standard regular assessment for them. Things that jump out for me is expected poor performance on general education test. We want to stay away from that as being a rationale for the alternate assessment, as well as low reading level achievement, as I had mentioned earlier. And then anticipated disruptive behavior due to emotional duress for them. It just needs to be, you can't avoid taking the regular assessment because of potential behaviors. The breadcrumb trail there, you can see in the slide there. Supplementary aids and services. The intention or the requirement of those is the team has to identify what areas the and provide appropriate services to enable the student to, I'm sorry, there's a lot of rollback. Please be sure to mute. Thank you. Team must identify and provide appropriate services to enable the student to advance appropriately toward attaining annual goals, to be involved and make progress in the general education curriculum, and to also have opportunity to participate in any extracurriculars. That is part of the IEP process, the extracurriculars. And to be educated and participate with other students with disabilities and non-disabled students in extracurriculars if need be. So those are things that can be talked about, should be considered when you are developing your supplementary aids and services for students. Tips. You want to make sure they're individualized. You want them to be data-based. Pull some of that stuff from the evaluation report, particularly if it's a new evaluation report. You could pull some of those from the implications. You can pull some ideas from that for some of those suggestions for supplementary aids and services. They need to be aligned with the accommodations and supports provided for statewide and district-wide assessments. So you need to put those in there, not just under the statewide or district-wide assessments. It needs to be there as well. Specific and detailed. You got to spell it out. Extra time for one of the common ones is extra time for task completion. And probably advisable to define what extra time means, rather than just, because in some people's roles, extra time could be 5 minutes, and others it could be 5 weeks. And so you need to be sure to define that in your extra time definition, or should you use that in your writing of the IEPs. Ensure everyone or anyone who is working with the student is aware of these items and utilizing them. So how do you get that information out to your teachers? How do you get them to the bus driver? How do you get them to your paras in the lunchroom? That stuff needs to be spelled out, how that gets to them. And those other people that you don't think about, that the student may come in contact with, the playground support people, obviously the bus driver, if there's some behavioral things, you just need to make them aware of the potential of issues that might come up. If counseling is necessary, you include that in the process for supplementary aids and services and so on. You can see the rest of that there. But we have categories under supplementary aids and services. On the right-hand side here, we have instructional, we have classroom assessments, personnel, and parent. So you can put things specific to each of those areas as needed as you're building or working through those editors in Infinite Campus. The accessibility piece within the special education process, as we've been working through everything, we talked about the evaluation report where we're identifying those implications. Again, not to be any predetermination language. Then we go into the PLAF statements, and from there you're going to the supplementary aids and services, and then they need to tie in with those statewide and district-wide assessments. So everything kind of flows together as you're building, as you go from one document to the other. There's the trail to get to providing those services. We get into extended school year, and I don't want to get onto a soapbox too high, but I think this is an area that Montana might be ripe for trouble. And that's just my personal opinion. But extended school year is not to be confused with summer school. Those are two different things. Summer school is intended to be credit recovery types of a class, or finishing up stuff that might not get completed during the course of the semester. But ESY is intended to focus on trying to minimize any type of regression or recoupment that might occur. In determining that, we typically, and this is from the being in the school districts myself, we would use the long breaks of maybe winter break, the Christmas holiday break, perhaps even the summer months to determine if the student had experienced quite the lag or regression that might occur. And I don't know. There's going to be a level of regression recoupment that occurs over 3 months. But we have seen examples where school districts have assessed a kid before they went to Disneyland on a family vacation, and then tested them again when they came back from Disneyland, and determined that regression or recoupment wasn't going to occur in that situation. I think that is where the rub lies, in my opinion, that we need to be able to have some real data, accurate data, to justify the need for extended school year for students. And now that we have assessments, statewide assessment is offered 4 times a year or multiple times in the year, I think that might give us some really good data as we move forward through things. So when you're making those determinations as a team, I would seriously be looking at that data from those assessments to be able to help in the determination of ESY, the need for ESY. That's my soapbox. I'll shut up. And if you determine that later on, you're going to make the determination for ESY. So let's say you have an IEP in November and you don't know if ESY is going to be appropriate or not, and you'll make that decision by May 5th. That is a formal meeting, and you need to schedule that with all the players on the team to make that determination. So when we come through for monitoring, we're looking for that. We're looking for the follow-up meeting having occurred when it says in the IEP that it will occur by, or when that determination is made. It's not just a phone call. It is an actual team decision, because there are multiple players who have to identify what areas are going to be focused on during that extended school year activity. One of the purposes of extended school year is to help, obviously, in addition to what I've already mentioned, is to help kind of get things ready to go for the start of the new school year, right? Oftentimes, our schools, we offer extended school year in June, and you still have the months of July and August before school resumes. So really, ESY offered in June is almost a waste of time, because you're still having a prolonged period of break during the months of July and August. So it doesn't really make much sense to have ESY in June, although it's better than not. It is frequently, it is recommended to maybe have that closer to the start of the school year, if at all possible. And by the way, for those people who hold on to the purse strings for the school districts, by July 1, you start a new budget. So it's not so much dealing with what's left over in the budget, it's dealing with what you have at the start of the budget, at the start of the school year, that might help with justification for bumping that to later on in the summer months. Recently, or this summer, we changed, maybe it was partway through the school year last year, we changed the language on the IEP that says, that deals with the reevaluation piece. The heading of that section of the IEP said reevaluation for eligibility determination. And we removed the eligibility determination language from the IEP. So just a reevaluation, not so much necessary for eligibility determination purposes, but just to get new benchline data for the student and where they're at. So the team, there used to be a period of time, for those of us who have been doing this for a little while, there was a period of time where every 3 years a reevaluation occurred. It happened. And somewhere along the line, the decision was made that the IEP team can make that determination. It still fits in the federal requirements for determining whether or not any reevaluation is necessary. And so students, you can have the conversation at the team meeting as far as determining whether or not you need to proceed with the reevaluation or not. What we're trying to do, hopefully by taking off the language in the reevaluation to determine eligibility, by removing that, we're hopeful that that creates a level of more frequent reevaluations. Oftentimes those evaluations might start in first or second grade, maybe even kindergarten, and then it doesn't happen again until their junior or senior year, and that's a shame. It should happen more frequently than that, if at all possible. So we're hopeful that that little change helps provide some stimulus to providing more frequent evaluations or reevaluations. Come on. Where did I go? Within the IEP process, we are asking for how does for accessibility and responsibility, how does everybody who works with that student, how do they become aware of what the accommodations might be, the goals might be, and their active role in the education of that student? Because ultimately it takes a village for the student to really achieve success. So you might provide a copy of accommodations or modifications for them. How is that given to them? It can be done through email, through verbal communication, or other, and you have the option to check on that stuff. One word of caution: if you hand stuff out, that the people who on the receiving end of that need to know how to warehouse or store that data or that information, because that certainly can become a FERPA issue, where that might be just laying around someplace for innocent eyes to see. So you want to make sure that if you're handing paper documents to your colleagues, that they understand that that needs to be stored someplace secure. IEP meeting participants, we have our required team members, right? We have obviously the special education, the case manager, any related service providers that might be appropriate, at school administration, and at least one regular education teacher within that IEP team participation, and then obviously the parent or guardian. So those are the required ones. The parent can invite others if they wish to, but their signatures are all going to be required to be on the participatory list. So that's not a binding signature. That just means that they were there and had opportunity to contribute towards the development of the IEP. Then we get into the notifications, and we're looking there for your invitations to the meetings and that sort of a thing, and making sure that the necessary people are there. If you have an excusal form, a parent has to go be a soccer coach or whatever, and they're not able to attend that meeting, then you need to have what is called an excusal form. It's always been in the system on an Infinite Campus, but it's seldom used. And so if a required participant is not able to attend the meeting or have a representative in their place, then they need to be able to have we're looking for an excusal form that basically says that this person is going to be speaking with the parent prior to the IEP meeting, sharing with them their findings, their concerns, and whatnot, and even maybe reviewing the goals that they might be working towards with their child. Or you look at rescheduling the IEP meeting if you just have too many people that are not able to attend to that meeting, obviously. The IEP approval is the binding signature on the IEP for the parent or guardian to sign. If often one of a thing that we're working on this year especially is to make sure that the prior written notice is completed before the parent signs that provides that binding signature on the approval form. So because when they sign that document, but that signature indicates that they agree with the contents of that IEP. If the prior written notice is not developed yet, they're signing something that they don't know what it says. So it's important and advisable to at least review with the parent what the contents of the PWN is going to look like before they sign that, before they authorize that IEP. Therefore, because the prior written notice is talking about, the word prior means things that were discussed prior to the implementation of the actual IEP document. Or the document in question. So things need to be, we're looking for an order there of making sure that the parent has opportunity for input, has opportunity for a dissenting opinion, or can seek clarification. The parent should be able to look at that prior written notice, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but a parent should be able to look at a prior written notice on their own at home and not have any guesswork as far as what the contents are. That's what you may recall. We were talking last week about trying to stay away from any acronyms or abbreviations on things, because that just makes it a little sticky for parents to have to decipher some of those wonderful alphabet soup things that we have in our world of special education. If a parent approves the majority of the IEP with a few exceptions, they have to provide a written justification noting those areas of exceptionality, and providing then the onus comes onto the school district to reconvene as soon as possible to address those areas that the parent might have exceptions with. So that is something that needs to be done sooner than later. The state does not have a definitive time frame for that or timeline. It just says as soon as possible or within a reasonable amount of time. That's the federal language, and the state kind of follows suit with that. So certainly within the week or 2 weeks would be reasonable, so about 10 days as a rule of thumb. But if you get into a month out and you still haven't, your IEP hasn't reconvened to address those areas, there's going to be some issues there, or there's potential for some issues with that type of a delay before coming back together. The IEP notes used to take the place of the prior written notice. And so those of us old schools, that's where everything else went, right? But now that the prior written notice is plugged in, you really kind of question what the point of having a note section is. But really it has its place. And you can see here on the list that it is not necessarily intended to capture the minutes of the meeting, but you can include things like test results in here. Let's say you were going, for example, you were going to maybe incorporate the use of occupational therapy through the IEP process. And this would be a good place for there to be a summary of the occupational therapy assessments that occurred. Could be plugged in the notes section of the IEP. If the meeting was ever rescheduled, this gives you a good place, in addition to the PWN, that you tried to get together for a meeting today. Something came up, parent was unable to attend, or the necessary people were not able to attend the meeting. So the note section is still kind of that, I guess that you call it kind of the junk drawer that we all have in our homes. And it can be the place to capture everything else that doesn't really have a home within the IEP process. All right. That was kind of a breakneck speed in less than an hour of an IEP. And I hope I haven't lost anybody through this process. Going to talk a little bit about making amendments to IEPs, and how does that work? First off, the IEP needs to be in the Infinite Campus uh, uh, system and locked there. It cannot be unlocked. You cannot amend an unlocked IEP. So first and foremost, the document needs to be locked. And then let's say you come together because maybe there's been a change in family dynamics, or there's been a change in the student schedule, what have you, that you need to look at making an amendment to that IEP as opposed to just doing a brand new IEP. So that's where the amendment can come into play. One thing to note about the amendments is that it does not extend the life of the 12-month timeline for annual review. It cannot. So you still have the annual review date, which is when the initial or the original IEP might have been written, but an amendment does not extend it. It just changes some of the content of the IEP. Amendments require parent approval, but it's important to know that that is not an IEP meeting to begin with. It can be if you want it to be, but it doesn't need to be. We are looking for at least 3 signatures, and that would be the administration, the obviously you as the case manager, and the parent. Those are the 3 signatures that must be associated with, at minimum, for an amended IEP. And we do have some information that we could provide if needed, if you're having some difficulty with amending IEPs. But I would just encourage you to reach out to either myself or a member of my team to get that information, that direction. There's been some discussion internally at the agency with regards to progress reports and the frequency of them. And so there might be some different guidance. We might be altering our guidance a little bit on this as we progress, but for the time being, every goal requires a progress report. That's pretty self-explanatory. The way the progress reports are noted or generated is they're just going straight from what the goals are in the IEP and transferring that onto a progress report form. And then you as the case manager need to insert the progress towards that particular goal, and providing, hopefully there should be data in there, not just student is making progress. Provide some information, provide some data collection information in there for the parents to see how their child might be doing. You have the option of providing the progress reports quarterly, semesterly, or other. And if you do check other, you would have to be sure to explain what other means. And so, but for the most part, progress reports are to be issued at the same time as everybody else's progress reports. So like report cards, and that kind of thing. And across the state, or the federal law says progress reports have to be issued at least twice a year. So that would be typically that semester and at the end of the school year. But if you provide progress, if your school provides progress reports on students on a quarterly basis, then you should probably be thinking about trying to provide those reports at the same time. That creates a layer of paperwork that I know some of my friends are just cringing over. But if the law says that they go out as frequently as their peers, that could be quarterly then, if you have report cards. What progress reports are or are not, they are not report cards. And they are not written based upon goals and data only. They are based upon quantitative data that you gather through your observations of the student's progress. You're going to be collaborating with the general education teachers as you can with regards to how are they doing? Are they staying on focused? It just depends on the nature of the goal. quarterly, semesterly, or other. Consider the results of the data for all progress reports. Thinking about that, maybe they're too hard. Maybe they're too aggressive in trying to get the student to achieve the goal. If the goals are being met early, we need to then, so let's say they take care of everything within the IEP. Maybe it's time to amend the IEP or write a new one to update those goals. And just because, and I think there's little pockets of thought out there that says just because a student meets all the goals of their IEP, now they can be exited from special education. That's not true. But occasionally we find we hear about why the student was exited, and that is because, and the justification is because they met all the goals on their IEP. That needs to be a larger process, or is a larger process, if that is what you're trying to achieve. If goals are not being met, then strongly consider writing doing an amendment to write new goals so that they can possibly be more achievable, or a greater likelihood of achievement for that student. In and out of state transfers, I had hoped to have a copy of the form here in front of me to share with you guys. I'm still working on that. But when a student transfers into your district, doesn't matter if they're in state or out of state, what is required on those transfer forms is the date of consultation with the parent. And that might be over the phone. It certainly could be face to face. There's also the date of we're looking for the date of the IEP, implementation of the IEP. When will that be effective tomorrow? Whatever the case might be. And then we have a new piece in there where it's called military connected students. And that's greater momentum at the federal level. And so we had to plug that in someplace onto some document. And really all that is just having a conversation with the family, and discovering if they are active military members of the military. And the reason for that is because some of our military families have to be fairly nomadic in nature. They're being shipped around all the time, frequently. And so the idea is to identify who those are, and hopefully if an evaluation is necessary or reevaluation might be necessary, that things are expedited for that particular individual. On the OPI, on the form itself, there is a link that you can click on for military connected students that provides some guidance and direction, definitions of things. So just because daddy might be in the National Guard doesn't necessarily mean that they are that there would be a need for expediting things. But if they are certainly if they are part of let's say Malmstrom Air Force Base, they may have to be moved. The families move around, and so that would need to be indicated there that they are that certainly applies to that student. And then we're looking for signatures. Those signatures right now are only two, and that would be the case manager and a school administrator involved with that student would be having that review. If you happen to have the opportunity to capture a parent signature on there, that doesn't hurt any. But you might be able to capture that signature when you're during that consultative discussion with the parent and determining what you're going to do with that IEP. If the student is out of state or they come from out of state, you need to determine whether or not the handicapping disability that they are identified as meets one of the state's 13 recognized areas. And so if, let's say, for example, a student, let's say just hypothetically, a student in California is recognized as dyslexic, as being a qualifying disability for them, and specifically dyslexic. In Montana, we recognize that under specific learning disabilities. Dyslexia is not recognized by itself. So there might be a need for a reevaluation. and needing to have a redefining of what their qualifying criteria might be. So the same requirements as above are part of that process. So you gotta, again, you have to have um, the date of consultation, you have to have the IEP, the date of implementation of the IEP, and so on. And then there's a bottom third on that form that talks about the what notes should you be taking, that you can maybe briefly describe or capture the steps involved with what's going to be happening next for that student and their educational programming. There's where my form is supposed to go. All right, we're doing pretty doggone good. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new stuff that has come down in the last couple of weeks with regards to age 20 or 19, 20, 22, up to 22-year-olds. And we're going to start with this is kind of a precursor to what Desiree will talk about in 2 weeks. So our next gathering will be on is that the 25th or 26th? It's a Thursday, same time, 4 o'clock. And Desiree will be talking primarily about transition IEPs and what those consist of. But we're going to talk next a little bit about some of the things specific to graduation here for the next few minutes, and then we'll open things up for any kind of questions that you might have. Okay. You may recognize this section of the transition IEPs. We are looking here for we've changed some of the language in these paragraphs here. First off, you've got the box that says that the student is expected to graduate with a regular high school diploma. And we'll talk about that in greater detail when Desiree comes around next in 2 weeks. The student is not expected to graduate with a regular diploma, and at the end of the current school year will return the following school year. The IEP must develop, or the team must develop an IEP for that coming school year. So that 13th year of school, 19th year of age. And so that's where you would be checking that box if necessary or appropriate. And then the last one, student is not expected to graduate with a regular diploma by the end of the year. The student or the district will not provide special education services during the next school year, so therefore the student would be no longer receiving or eligible for FAPE services. So what does all of that mean? Ultimately, there is a need we're having some discussions, and there is some guidance that is forthcoming very soon with regards to maybe some what types of measurements do you use for graduation. In Montana, we only recognize, at least as of right now, Montana only recognizes a high school diploma. There is no other option. It is a diploma only, and maybe as a result of this lawsuit and future legislative sessions, there will be alternatives developed, but that's at least 2 years away. So in the meantime, we have to deal with the whole student graduating with a high school diploma or not at all. And a high school diploma has a certain level of benchmarks associated with that, or levels of achievement. So students are allowed then to continue to receive services until they're 22, if at all possible. I'm not going to get into can they graduate, can they not. That we'll have future discussions about that with future statewide directors meetings, and then they can disseminate that to you guys at this point. But the ink is still wet on that paper, and we're trying to get some stuff out to you as soon as we can. We currently have some stuff on our OPI website. In fact, Tammy just did it this afternoon with updates to where we're trying to work on updating our guidance document. And there's a section dealing with that incorporates some of this new language or guidance for graduation and such. that is on the OPI website under forms and guides. Okay. That graduation box that we were just looking at needs to be completed during the student's 12th grade year or senior year of school. And then you are needing to provide some types of prior written notice with how that's going to work out for a student. The wrong time for a parent to find out that their son or daughter is not going to graduate is April. So the sooner you can have those conversations, the better. And so if you have an IEP that is going to carry that you're doing in their junior year, that's going to carry over into their senior year, especially for our low achieving students, the sooner you can address the matter of graduation, the better. And I know that can be a very touchy conversation, and potentially contentious, but it will be it is one that needs to happen. So you don't want to check that box if you can, or check a box until their senior year. If a student is expected to graduate early, treat the final year as this final year as the student's senior year. The student's returning for an additional year of school, you treat each subsequent year as an additional senior year. So they could be in that senior year for a total of maybe 4 years, perhaps. And then if a student is graduating with a regular diploma or aging out, documentation must be included in the prior written notice, or also known as the PWN. And we're going to talk about that here next, or in a little bit. This is a hard slide to read because there's a lot of information on here. But a written notice for parents needs to be given to a written notice must be given to the parents of a child or a student with a disability a reasonable time before the public agency proposes or initiates a change. That's the whole part of the prior written notice. It has to be given to them before things are implemented, not afterwards. So if you, as a school district, as a case manager, if you can, it might be advisable to seek support in writing a prior written notice while the meeting is going on, if you can. Not always can you, but if you might have a colleague who's able to capture the conversations that occur while you, as a case manager, are trying to keep that meeting moving forward. So that first paragraph applies to all prior written notices. So then you have then the next paragraph there: graduation from high school with a regular high school diploma constitutes a change of placement requiring a prior written notice that supports that change of placement. The school year ends, the student has met the requirements, they are going to be graduating and moving on. So that is viewed in the court's eyes as a change of placement, and you can read the rest of that paragraph. This is a hard one to read because it's so small, and I tried to make it blow it up as best I could, but this is these are some examples of a graduating or a student who is in that senior year, and you're looking at graduation possibilities. There are 3 examples here, pretty much across the board. The first example is talking about the fact that the student's going to be graduating. These are some canned answers to put in the sections of the prior written notice. Example number 2 is that they are going to require some additional time, and with the hope or intention of actually achieving the end result of a high school diploma. And then number 3 is that that the student would be aging out. So it just kind of gives you some examples of some language left for writing your prior written notice for your students. And with that, I am going to then I'm going to stop sharing, and that concludes my portion of the presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to hang on, or any of my team. I think there's 1 or 2 of us on here that might be able to help with some brainstorming. Otherwise, we will be talking about transition IEPs which I know excludes our elementary teachers out there, but it might be helpful information for you down the road to maybe pick some. You might pick some things up through that conversation, but that will be 2 weeks from tonight, not next week, because there is a neurodiversity conference that my team's going to be attending, and they won't be available to provide. We won't be able to provide the nuts and bolts next week. All right. Any questions that you might have?
John, there were quite a few questions in the chat, so
Oh, okay.
I'll see if folks on the call, if you want to raise your hand, if you have a question here, that'll just help us prioritize real live people on the call, but otherwise I can read you some questions from the chat. The first one, John, was how do I add the qualifications on a completely new IEP? I'm not sure what they mean by qualifications, but that's from Faith. I don't know if she's still here and could clarify, but.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So student just qualified, had evaluation, report meeting, all that good stuff. They qualified under specific learning disability, but I cannot figure out how to get that to show up when I go into the IEP document.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't transfer over to that front page of the IEP.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make sure your evaluation report is locked.
Okay.
If it is not locked, it won't have, there's nothing for it to read or to pull from.
Okay. I thought it might be something like that, but
Pretty simple. Yep. Yep.
I didn't want to step on our school
Nope.
psych's toes either. So.
Good question, Faith. Thank you. It happens a lot, believe it or not.
Yeah, we covered that last week. I heard a lot of make sure you lock in our IC session. Cassidy asked, do you need to complete a full evaluation for a student receiving speech therapy if you're trying to exit them from services and are not the case manager? And I think she might mean full like re-evaluation, but the full evaluation for exiting students.
Are they just speech only?
I don't know if Cassie's still on the call, but and I guess the question is an evaluation required to exit, or can the team determine they no longer qualify, or is a full evaluation required?
A full evaluation. Yeah.
Okay.
A full evaluation, comprehensive evaluation for speech would be needed. Yes.
Okay. And so you would have to do like the full evaluation, like meeting and things like that.
Advisable.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
A lot of questions around the recording. I'm just scanning down, or let's see. Do teachers need to sign the accommodation sheet so that we document that they were given that information?
That's a good question. And the answer is it depends. As in special ed, it would be nice if there was black and white, but it's not. It kind of is. I guess it kind of depends on upon the flavor or the culture of your school. We don't require that, we being OPI, but it might not be a bad idea just to ensure that your colleagues are taking that stuff seriously, and that they were made known of the necessary accommodations that they should be making for students. It's not a pick and choose sort of a thing.
Okay. Val asked, when the guidance document is updated, will an email go out to the special education directors so they can notify staff? Now, Val, I updated a guidance document today, but I had to step away for a moment, so I don't know what which guidance document you're referring to, but there is a new guidance document on the webpage this afternoon.
It's a lot of the former, Val. But we're starting to change the guidance document overall to be more like chapters, so we can work on a section of it at a time, as opposed to just one big monster of a guidance document. That's part of the reason why it's been such a long time for us to revise that, is because of the struggle trying to get through the document in its entirety. So we're breaking it into chapters and subchapters. If you look, Tammy's showing you right there, we have a new one, a chapter 1 right now, and it may change over as additional chapters are added, but there's guidance there that we just posted today on those areas outlined with graduation and class ranking and such.
And so how that looks if you try to access the old guidance has all the old questions, and it's 129 pages in length. When you look for the graduation section, so apologies for the scrolling, it's just the fastest way to get there. When you get to the graduation section, instead of taking you to that, it will tell you that this section has been replaced. So the old guide, if you're referencing the current one, will link you out to the new guidance for that section. So that replaced not just graduation, but diplomas, transcripts, grades, class ranking, and honor roll. We know it's not perfect, but we are working to get that out. And then that will take you to this chapter, which is just a shorter one page of table of contents. So it's a 10-page document. So it has more background information than previously has been in the one guide in terms of some of the FAPE and law and those guidance. And then it will go into graduation, diplomas, and transcript questions specifically as well. So that is new, and that I can share the website where that is
Thank you, Tammy.
posted as well.
Yep.
It will go out to directors on the directors calls and in the Compass, but I don't know other ways. There's going to be a director's update spot on the website too, but right now you're getting the best, most up-to-date information by being here tonight. John, there's a couple other questions in the chat.
I'm looking at from Ruth. I see I have a student whose IEP is not locked in Infinite Campus because it was uploaded as a PDF and needs amending. What do I need to do? Ruth, I'd be happy to talk with you about that. If you could email me that, I can get a response to you hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, if that's possible.
Okay.
Is that okay? You
Yes,
bet.
thank you.
Sarah Sullivan asks, how do I sign an attendance roster?
Attendance, so participatory signature?
I think so.
In that case, that I would have a blank one, a paper one there at the meeting, and just capture your signatures that way. Then you can upload those into Infinite Campus along with the parent signature, thereby authorizing the IEP.
Okay. Oh, my question was actually more about for tonight's workshop. Sorry, my camera's not working for some reason when I did Teams. So I was curious about like my attendance because last week we did it on on Zoom, and I felt like I put my name in the chat, so I wasn't sure. I wanted to make sure I was enrolled.
Tammy, can you speak to that?
Yep. Yeah, I did
All right.
mark you as I went through and marked everyone as attended. I think I do need to get the evaluation in the chat for you guys so that we can get the evaluation form
Yes.
for this session. That's how you get renewal units.
Perfect.
So I will get that in there too. That's another way, but I did try to mark everyone who was in attendance. I know there with the transition to Teams, a couple people definitely had barriers, which is why we try to host in Zoom, and our tech folks have figured out why we had that issue, but a little too late for us tonight. So we will be back in Zoom hopefully on the 25th, and
Okay,
we'll
perfect.
sign in early and make sure we get first access to the Zoom on that day. We'll make somebody else have a crisis. But there is the evaluation form is the same as last week, and then you will submit that for today, September 11th, and give us feedback on the session, and then that's what we will use as well as the attendance we captured. Yeah, because we got a late start, I didn't have you guys throw it all in the chat, but I did mark everyone as attendance. I think there was a couple folks I wasn't sure on, but I took a gander and a guess.
Danny, you had a question?
Yes, I had to come in a little bit late. I had a doctor's appointment. I just wanted to make sure I got counted.
You bet. Yep.
I did get you marked down, Danny.
Thank
Glad
you.
you can make it, Danny.
I think the only one I wasn't sure about was East Co-op. If there's, or if there's who's in that room, I made a note, but I wasn't sure who that might be. I don't know if they're still on the call, but.
I do have a question. This is Sam Bruner. My chat's not working. Is there a way to get that form emailed?
Yep. I will
Okay.
email it to Sam.
Oh, for evaluation? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought
Yes,
you had
please.
Sam?
another question, Sam.
Nope, that was it. No, my chat's not working, and I just wasn't able to get a link. So
Yeah,
You bet.
sbruner@Huntley, is that the right email
correct.
address?
Thank you. Yep.
Sam, are there other people in attendance there with you that you know of?
My son is.
Okay,
We're doing double duty here. I got
never mind.
a side job that I'm working on. So no.
Okay,
But I do have some staff that are back in the classroom. They were able to get on the second the Teams link. So
could you have them, I don't know if they're listening or not, but we need to get a roster of who was in attendance there.
okay.
Can you follow
I
up
know-
with that, please?
Yep, I will. Well, I know Cammie, Sarah,
Cammie's
and Mark.
marked.
Yep.
Yep.
And I believe Sarah and Mark. I don't know if they're.
Yep. Sarah Reynolds, I have marked, and I'm
Yep.
just scrolling down to
Okay,
find
all right.
Mark Wandel is from Huntley.
Yep, just want to make sure we
Great.
get credit where it's due, so thank you.
Great.
Tammy, East Co-op is Christina Olstad. I typed
Oh,
it
okay. Great. Thank you. I saw you had Christine. Yeah, I saw you were on the call at first, and then you had echoing issues. So
in. I did. Yep.
okay, perfect. Got you marked down. Thank you so much. I could see who you were when you were Christina on there, even with your face, but appreciate you fixing that.
Are there any other questions for tonight?
I think there's just one more in the chat about accommodations and modifications. Shelby said, can you give examples of what accommodations and modifications that you could list under personnel and parent?
Okay, that's a good question, Shelby, and that might involve maybe some training for personnel that might be needed, that you might need to get some of that stuff lined out within the IEP process itself. The parent part of that's a good question. I don't know that I have ever come across an example to give you for that one, but the personnel part would be what would be necessary for school staff to assist that child in hopefully achieving some successes.
Thanks for clarifying that. I was just curious. We've had case managers list like paraprofessionals, that's where they're listing out one-to-one and things like that. So I just want to make sure we're cleaning that up.
Yep. Good question. Anything else? Going once, twice. All right.